Escape to Southern Point. The Stray, Volume 2 in Jennifer Olmstead's Virginia Southern Point collection. Copyright 2017-2024 Jennifer Olmstead and Titian Press. All rights reserved worldwide. Dedication for Dave, who survived.
The Stray by Jennifer Olmstead. Chapter 1. The mid-November morning meted out a handful of sun and a few miles an hour of damp, frigid wind to southeastern Virginia. Typical autumn weather for the region. On the shoulder of rural Creed's Run Road, a 1-foot strip of gravel coated with a thin layer of russet pine needles, and crowned by one very dead possum, Dare Jordan balanced his Sirota road bike between lean, strong thighs, and pulled his head of short, wavy hair, which was the color of aged tobacco, out of a vented red helmet. He secured the helmet by way of its chin strap to the middle of the bike's handlebar to avoid scratching it, paused his MP3 player, and retrieved his beeping phone from a plastic bag tucked within a zippered leather under the seat satchel. He squeezed one hazel eye shut to make out the caller's phone number, inhaled a deep breath of icy air through his nostrils, held it until the count of 10, and released it through pursed lips. "Dare Jordan speakin'," he forced out, nipping the G off the end of the last word, evidence of his conversion to the homogenized dialect of the new American South. A multi-generational Yankee lured below the Mason-Dixon line by Virginia's temperate climate and its strong economic forecast, it had taken Dare most of 2 decades to surrender in full to the region's native tongue. Early on in his immigration, he fought hard against verbal assimilation, but with the G of his INGs now softened away to nothing, and his frequent use of the term y'all, which began as a joke, the transformation was complete and irrevocable. "Dare, now I hate like hell to do this to y'all on a Sunday," the caller sputtered out. "But we're having some problems here." Dare imagined a fan of saliva accompanying the delivery of each broken word into the office phone's mouthpiece. "Yeah, Dare," the caller went on. "It's, the Robert Motors year-end financial statement." The "we" on the other end of the phone was Buddy Sams, one of Dare's 5 partners at Hawkins, Neff and Griffin, CPAs, Norfolk's largest independent accounting firm, or HNG, as members of the firm referred to themselves. At 5'10" and 320 pounds, 60-year-old Buddy Sams let himself around with his belly. Each day, he coerced his smattering of gray hair into a slick comb-over with a heavy dose of hair tonic, the result being a halo of alcohol fumes, which intensified when Buddy was anxious, excited, or angry. And in his 16 years with the firm, Dare couldn't recall a day that Buddy did not exhibit all 3 emotional extremes. The man's cleft chin all but disappeared beneath a cushion of fat, which obscured both his neck and collarbone. His gray eyes reminded Dare of whale's eyes, lashless and thick-lidded and tucked beneath an expanse of crease and skin. If he wanted the floor in a meeting and believed he was being overlooked, or if he didn't like what somebody had to say, Buddy began a string of staccato palilalia, repeating the same word a dozen or more times, keeping his voice in the conversation but not technically interrupting the rightful speaker. When the other person paused out of frustration, and at some point they did, he rushed to fill in the blanks with his own rhetoric. A holdover from the firm's younger days when small business owners and local farmers didn't trust an accountant whose knowledge of finance exceeded their own by a significant degree, Buddy held a shrinking book of business at HNG. Buddy was undisciplined, careless, disrespectful, and an equity share consuming SOB, if you asked Dare. But no one did, and he hadn't sensed the cue to volunteer his assessment. He knew a lot about the people he worked with, much more than they knew about him. And he knew the only reason Buddy would show up at work on a Sunday morning was to make up for time lost on the Robert Motors financial statement, or to be more accurate, time stolen, while he was in some sleazy motel, screwing his married girlfriend instead of his wife. Heart pounding from his sudden stop, Dare pulled his cell phone away from his ear with a numb hand, still programmed to maintain a lock grip on the bike's handlebar. "Fuck," he mouthed to the barren farm fields on either side of the road. He had slammed the bike to a full brake from high gear, and now began calculating the necessary steps to resume his ride. Raise the rear wheel, downshift and pedal forward, hope the chain wouldn't drop. If it did, reset the chain and start the process again. There was no room on the road's shoulder to work in safety. No room for error. Best possible outcome? His pace was shot, the ride was awash, and his hands would be filthy from filament, dust and grease, because for the first time in a decade, he had forgotten to put a clean cloth in his toolkit. "Now, I know it's the weekend and all," Buddy blathered before delivering a hissing wheeze. "Dare, y'all there?" Yeah, I'm here." Drops of briny sweat broke out on Dare's forehead and trickled down his face, stinging his eyes and lips. He pulled off his wet gloves and folded them into a tight square, creating a makeshift blotting pad. After a few swipes, it was wringing wet. He started to rub a damp palm on his pearly zoomy shorts, but wondered what damage kneading salt and sunscreen into the black fabric might cause, and yanked back his hand as though he had just touched a hot stove. "I'm not at home now, Buddy. I should be back. He coughed and checked his Swiss chronograph watch. It was 9:21 a.m. "Give me until noon." "I'm surely sorry about this, Dare," Buddy insisted. "I surely am." Drenched, shivering, and straddling his bike, Dare tiptoed along the road to a large white mailbox. He leaned his elbow on the mailbox and focused beyond it across the grass, at a battered red and white trailer, bathed with dirt and rust. It was the only structure in sight and looked abandoned. A post and board fence, long past its prime and shedding chunks of thick white paint, bordered the trailer's front yard. He could tell that the fence had been well constructed decades earlier and subjected to its current state of neglect in the recent past. He had breezed by the place 100 times on previous bike rides, never taking a hard look at it for two reasons. 1, he was traveling at a 20-mile-an-hour clip. And 2, it didn't qualify as one of the aesthetic highlights of Southern Point. If Buddy had called him 1 minute later, Dare would have been a half-mile further down the road, in front of a pristine renovated farmhouse with latticework trim and a paved, level driveway. There, he could have paced the driveway apron to cool down, maybe have propped his bike on one of the brick entrance pillars. But he was here, saturated, his core temperature sinking to a point that would leave him with a miserable chill for the rest of the day. He needed to get Buddy off the phone and get moving again. Now, Dare, if there was any other way to try and figure this thing out, Buddy rambled on. Dare reached in his jersey pocket and pulled out a black wind jacket, studying the old house trailer for signs of life. "Buddy," he said, resigned to an afternoon trip to the office, "understood." He started to crane his head over his left shoulder toward what sounded like a truck, minus its muffler, or maybe a tractor, approaching. "I'll see." The phone sprang from Dare's hand and bounced across the pavement as an old black van straightened out the curve in the road, its extended side mirror catching his arm and slamming him against the unyielding mailbox, which had been anchored to the ground years before with a thick iron pipe set in a concrete well. After taking the full impact of the van's metal and glass appendage with his left shoulder and ribcage, Dare's slim frame slammed against the mailbox, arced over the handlebar of his bike, and carried it with him sideways into a shallow ditch below. There were two of them, standing over him, staring at him. The first one was fat and old, a decrepit Bassett hound in the process of delivering a strand of toxic drool onto Dare's neck, blinking at him repeatedly with cloudy eyes crusted over at the corners with gray gunk. Dare almost choked as the smell of rancid wax from the dog's ears drifted downward, assaulting his nostrils. The odor was more effective than smelling salts in rousing him. Next to the dog stood a young boy. From beneath a green and orange striped sweater, a strip of the boy's pink belly flesh popped out of blue corduroy pants that were a size too small for his stocky body. He looked about 6 or 7, with thick brown hair and brown eyes, and a streak of either dirt or chocolate smudged across his chin. Dare squeezed his eyes shut for a moment and looked again to be sure he wasn't hallucinating. "Hey, mister, you okay?" the boy asked in a thick drawl, scratching his nose and kicking at a spot on the grass with one of his grimy sneakers. The dog yawned, presenting 2 rows of yellow tartar-caked teeth, and held its position above Dare. Its breath hung in the small space between them like a rank cloud. I don't know," Dare mumbled, flat on his back, the metal chain of his bike cutting into his left calf. "Huh?" the boy asked, scratching the side of his bare waist. Dare wondered if the kid had fleas. The boy scrunched up his face. "What do you say?" The pressure in Dare's chest was crushing. "I can't seem to catch my breath." He coughed, and thought he might black out again from a level of pain he wasn't sure his body had the resources to endure. His brain was shutting down. "Am I going to die?" he asked himself. "Mister, you..." "Wait here," the boy said. "Lila and me, we'll get my Gran Rose. Be right back." He and the dog vanished from Dare's fading visual range. Breathing was like trying to suck in a lungful of air through a coffee straw. Dare was suffocating. He closed his eyes, fighting against panic. When he opened them again, he had no idea whether minutes or an hour had elapsed, but the boy was back, holding hands with a reed-thin old woman who couldn't have topped 5 feet. She wrestled an enormous sweatshirt over her plaid house dress and then splayed her legs to steady herself. "Oh, son, they got you good, didn't they?" she asked, her pale blue eyes grazing the surface of Dare's body. The wind tousled her wavy white hair around her face. She pressed it flat against the sides of her head to keep it out of her eyes. "Let me see here, son," she said. What month is it?" "November," the boy screamed. "Not you, Hoagy," she scolded, her voice crackling from the effort. "Young man, what state are we in?" Dare huffed out an audible answer. "Virgin, yeah." "Y'all remember the day of the week?" Sunday," Dare said, gasping for air. He pulled in less oxygen after each exhale. She rubbed her forehead with her fingers, coaxing out an idea. I'm not liking your color. But if you can move your arms and legs, let's get you inside somehow. It's nearly freezing out here today, and the neighbors are saying it might take a while for the ambulance to get here. Believe me, I know." The boy pulled at the handlebars on Dare's bike. "Don't touch anything yet, Hoagy," the woman yelled. "Not yet. He might have broken bones." She grabbed at her throat, catching her breath. "Lord, boy." "Settle down." The boy jerked back his hand and shoved it into one of his pants pockets. Dare kicked away from the bike, closed his eyes, and forced his 3 functioning extremities outward in one unified motion, as he'd done when he'd made snow angels as a boy. Pathetic as it was, his demonstration of mobility must have met with the woman's approval. She looked over at the trailer and then back at Dare. "Okay then. I guess we can try and get you up." "Okay, Hoagy, give him a hand, son." Hoagy dragged Dare's twisted bike to the trailer and propped it up against the front steps. He raced back to the ditch and began pulling on Dare's right shoulder with surprising strength. Dare tensed his muscles and jackknifed to a sitting position. My bike," he stammered, hit by a rush of dizziness. "How long was I out?" He tucked his legs under him and pushed himself up from the ground with his right arm. "Long enough now. Stop talking or you're gonna be out again," the woman said, as she and Hoagy helped Dare shuffle up the trailer steps. "Ah, shucks," she muttered. "Your head, you're bleedin'." Dare started to reach back behind his head with his left hand to find the source of the bleeding. But he stopped dead when a slug of pain ripped across his upper body. "Ah!" he cried out, hunching over. "Watch it, son," Rose shouted. "Easy now." As he ducked into the trailer, Dare noticed a spotless beige love seat lining one paneled wall, and an antique console table against the other, both sorely out of place in the dilapidated mobile home. He took a couple of shallow breaths, tried to make sense of the place, the people, but the old woman's voice broke into his thoughts. She stood before him, her lips moving. Now she was shaking her head back and forth. He strained to hear her, to make out her muffled words, but couldn't. He grabbed at the air in front of him. Everything went black.
End of chapter 1.